I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Good afternoon and welcome to I-24 News' ongoing coverage of Israel at war. I'm Ariel Levin-Waldman. Rocket fire continues on Israeli communities. Morning air raid sirens on the Israel-Gaza border. Fighting against Hamas strongholds continues in various fronts across the Gaza Strip at this hour. Overnight, the Israeli Air Force destroyed a rocket launching site that was targeting the city of Sderot. Paratroopers took a Hamas structure in Khan Yunis where they located 250 rockets, mortars, and RPG missiles ready for use. Heavy fighting today also in the West Bank, where Israeli troops eliminated at least 3 Palestinian terrorists in the city of Jenin during an arrest raid in which the militants opened fire and threw explosives at the forces. Terrorists were eventually eliminated with a drone strike. Meanwhile, on the northern front, a brief lull in the fighting overnight. That came after Hezbollah, the terror group there, fired dozens of rockets and anti-tank missiles towards Israeli communities and military posts yesterday. But the fight against Iran's malign proxies continues further abroad still. In the Red Sea, the Iran-backed Houthis confirmed they were behind the missile attack against the Norwegian tanker Strinda last night, which they say was on its way to the Israeli port city of Ashdod. And we are going to open with our eye in the south, where we have our correspondent Pierre Clochindler. We're actually going to instead discuss this more in studio while we attempt to reconnect to our correspondent Pierre in the south. Sitting with me right now is Hanan Geffen, Brigadier General Hanan Geffen, the former commander of the 8200 Intelligence Unit. I want to take the opportunity to address the Houthi situation. They are expanding their operations against anything Israel-linked, no longer a ship owned by a shipping company that has partial Israeli ownership. Now, anything heading towards Israel in their name, in their words, this is putting them on a collision course with almost everybody because international shipping is considered sacrosanct.
Yeah, first of all, let's establish their status. They are a proxy of Iran. They are acting under guidance of Iran, encouragement of Iran, and so on. Now, if we see the statement is degrading, first of all, they started with, we are shooting at Eilat, and until Israel will not stop invasion of Gaza, will not stop. Now, the last statement, until food is not entering into Gaza, we will not stop. So trying to kind of back off, because they are seeing what is going, the coalition is going to, is now gathering. I believe the game they try is bigger than they are. They enter a game which is bigger and several numbers on their capabilities. They're surrounded by the Saudis, the Southern Yemenis, and of course the international coalition, the US, Britain, France, Japan, and I will guess even the Chinese will enter, because this is disrupting international trade significantly. This is the way. A Bab el-Mandab is a way to the Suez Canal, to Israel Gulf, to Aqaba Gulf, very heavy international commercial traffic. And they know it. They know that they have to be very careful. We'll see how it develops. I don't believe it's the problem of Israel right now. It's a problem Israel has to be attentive to, defend as much as it can. It is not our direct problem right now. We have a bigger problem that we have to solve in the near future.
So what do they really have to gain by doing this if they're only inviting total destruction on their own heads?
I believe it's the same that we see in Hezbollah, the same proxy guided by Iran to go on to war with Israel.
Okay, we're going to continue this discussion very briefly, but first we are going to turn to our correspondent in the south, Pierre Clochindler, standing by just outside the border town of Sderot. Walk us through what the most recent updates on that front are, Pierre.
Right. Here, we're just facing the northern sector of the Gaza Strip. This is the area of Bet Hanun, and there's still a lot of activity here, although it's under full operational control by the IDF for a few days already. But there's a lot of infrastructure that the engineering corps and the Yahalom unit, which is specialized in neutralizing tunnels, are activated very much with neutralizations of tunnels and tunnel shafts. Earlier, you aired the excerpt of what the General Security Services head, Ronen Bar, said while on a visit in Khan Yunis. He said, this is a war of tunnel shafts. And indeed, there are thousands of them strewn all over the 380 square kilometers of the Gaza Strip, be it in the north, in the center, or in the south. And this adds to the complexity of the fighting, because tunnel shafts are used in many instances to ambush the Israeli troops, such as popping out of a tunnel shaft, of a tunnel, launching a rocket-propelled grenade and then disappearing inside the tunnel. Or sometimes, if the tunnel is inclined in an angle, then the terrorists can put a landmine, stick it to the tank and explode it, while at the same time he enters the tunnel to protect himself. So this is extremely difficult. Fighting is still going on for a 12th consecutive day on the northern outskirts of Gaza City in the Jabalia refugee camp, where the army is also finding a lot of weapons in residential homes used by civilians but taken over by Hamas terrorists, and as well as in the southeastern outskirts of Gaza City in the Shejaya neighborhood. And since December 1st as well, Khan Yunis has been the make or break of Hamas, in a sense that the political and military leadership are located there, according to the IDF intelligence, because they come from Khan Yunis, they're originated from there, and they believe that they can trust the most loyal people in the vicinity of Khan Yunis. Now, Khan Yunis is a different ball game, because if here we're talking about high-rise buildings that were demolished by the Israeli air bomb campaign, in Khan Yunis, this is an area with a lot of farming land, a lot of orchard where the terrorists can hide and ambush the ground forces. We know that they're fierce fighting on the eastern outskirts of Khan Yunis in El Abassan, as well as on the northern eastern outskirts in Bani Suhela. And inside Khan Yunis, 98 Division, which is the division of all the commando units of the IDF, is fighting close combat. Also, the city is encircled, and the only way out of the battlefield for the non-involved Palestinian civilian population is by the west of Khan Yunis. In the northern sector as well, there's a few tens of thousands people that never left the battlefield, and they are required to use the humanitarian access, the Salah ad-Din access that cuts across the Gaza Strip from the east of Gaza City, from north to south. And they're urged by the IDF to join the cohort of displaced Palestinians and find shelters at dedicated places. In Rafah, still bombing as well, because there are targets of a terror faction called the Popular Resistance Committee, and there this terror faction has made a lot of money via smuggling through the Egyptian border into the Gazan territory. And the fear also of the IDF is that the political and military leadership of Hamas will try to use some of the tunnels that still exist between Gaza and the Egyptian border and flee to the Egyptian territory with hostages. This is one of the fears of the IDF.
Thank you very much for that report from the South, Pierre, and that update on that front. Hanan, I want to turn back to you. You're an intelligence guy yourself, and one of the things Pierre mentioned at the opening of his report was something that interested both of us, the appearance of the head of the Shin Bet Internal Security Services in Khan Yunis itself. What do we make of this appearance?
First of all, my personal remark, I know the Shabak many years, worked with them very closely in the military. This is the first time I see such an appearance of head of the Shabak with the military in the territory of Gaza, and this is just it symbolizes, or it is distinguish this war from other wars. This is not just a military war. It is a war where we have to go into civilian population and try to separate Hamas from the civilians. Now, the military is not trained to do so. The Shabak people, which are part of the military, each group, probably they are, and as the head of the Shabak mentioned, they are part of the troop. They're trying to distinguish the innocent citizens, if they are so in Gaza, from operative of Hamas, or people, of course, fighter of the Hamas. All the targets that are targeted from day one are intelligence-driven. Now, one of the problems of the Palestinians, the Hamas, is to understand what the IDF is doing. The IDF is, for that matter, all the military, the observers in the Arab networks do not understand what the IDF is doing. There is no direct advance of kilometers over the distances, but very careful, targeting houses, targeting institutions, and then drawing back, then coming back, because this is an intelligence-driven operation. For instance, just to give you one of them, today there is a hospital called Kamal Adwan, the same as the Shifa hospital. This hospital was part of the Hamas headquarters, system of headquarters. They sheltered there. Now, after a few days of blockade, today the military, with the help of the Shabak, is entering this hospital and trying to see who is a citizen, a real refugee, and who are Hamas people sheltering, mingling within the population. So this is what the importance of the visit of Mr. Ronen. It symbolizes in a magnificent way the incorporation of the Shabak in this war, and this is one of the heaviest task of the military, is to distinguish innocent population from the Hamas in this part of the war, and it will go on. I believe that there is another task for the Shin Bet, Shabak. It try to prepare the ground for future operation, because this war will not end in a ceasefire. This war will go on a small scale, trying to make sure that the Hamas will not gain again. Once it's broken, it's a command post, is a command system, command and control system is broken to small factions. This faction will not grow again, will not create any risk or any danger to the villages surrounding Gaza. So there will be constant raids into areas where the intelligence will come up with targets that was attacking, and I believe the Shin Bet, the Shabak, already started to work on this direction.
Well, Hanan, thank you very much for that explanation, and hopefully a plan to prevent a power vacuum from filling the time after Hamas. We are going to turn our attention, though, to the north, first. The United States wants some explanations of Israel's use of white phosphorus in Lebanon. The chemical is an incendiary with military applications. It creates smoke screens or saturates an area with inextinguishable fire. But if it's used on civilian areas, it can constitute a war crime. Israel has reportedly made use of white phosphorus shells when firing on Hezbollah military positions. But some of those positions have reportedly been mixed in with some civilian areas.
There is legitimate military use for white phosphorus, but that does not include using them on civilians. It means that if you use them, you have to do everything you can to minimize civilian harm. Anytime that we provide items like white phosphorus, or really anything, to another military, we do it with the expectation that it will be used for legitimate purposes and in full keeping with international humanitarian law and the law of armed conflict. So we're looking into this and looking for additional information.
And we are going to turn our live eye to the northern border, where our Middle Eastern correspondent Ariel Oseran is standing by. Ariel, we have seen the United States make these statements about the use of white phosphorus in Lebanon. How has this been used in the combat up there?
Right, Ariel. So this all started with the Washington Post investigation regarding the use of this white phosphorus bomb in October 16th. in the southern Lebanese village of Dahaira. As a result of this use, 9 people were injured, 3 were hospitalized. So following this comment by the White House, we also heard yesterday IDF spokesperson Daniela Gari confirm that indeed the IDF does use these white phosphorus bombs. However, and as Matthew Miller said earlier, as we just heard, there are legitimate uses for this. Now, the IDF says that it uses this bomb to uncover Hezbollah positions that are hidden deep under thick foliage in forested areas, claiming that they use it in open areas, indeed not on civilian population. It's also not clear whether those who were injured on that said October 16th incident were combatants or civilians. This is not something that has been independently confirmed. And so the IDF and Israel trying to push back, claiming that while there are restrictions of the use of this weapon that should be stated can be dangerous when coming in contact with human skin, can cause severe burns, and that's why there are limitations for its use. The IDF saying that Hezbollah has entrenched itself all in nature reserves all across southern Lebanon, using these nature reserves, these wooded areas, to kick off their attacks as a launching pad for also rockets, but also in anticipation for any ground operations. And so, given that the IDF says that this is a legitimate Hezbollah target, that is its position. However, this does come in the wake of injuries and an investigation by international humanitarian organizations.
Thank you very much, Ariel, for that update from the Northern Front. We'll be back with you for more later in the show. And we have to turn our eye back to the events of October 7th. 58 Israeli police officers died protecting the partygoers of the Nova Festival on that day. It makes it the biggest tragedy in the history of the Israeli police. Sagi was one of the police officers that survived after facing down 14 terrorists himself. Our Mor Ellen has more in this next story.
It's Sagi's first time back in the fighting zone of the Nova Festival since October 7. Barbara, his girlfriend, is with him. He brought her for moral support, but returning still made him uneasy.
It's hard, bringing a lot of memories, a lot of people that you saw at that day that are not with us today. A lot of memories. I arrived here at 6 o'clock in the morning for morning shift here in the party. A lot of young people, happy, dancing, good vibes. The stage was here in the middle. All the people, you can see the picture of the fortunately murdered was here. In the middle was the dancing area. The war room and the firefighter room and all this thing was in the back of the stage. And when I arrived, we just preparing ourselves to the shift, to secure the area, to make sure everything is okay, everybody's okay. And in about 6:30, kinda, we saw a lot of rockets coming from Gaza into Israel. Immediately, the police commander that was in the party told us, all the officers, to go inside the party and stop the music and evacuate everybody out.
At first, the police present asked the party goers to lie on the ground. Minutes later, they decided to evacuate them completely. As people were leaving the area, the situation was revealed to be graver than imaginable.
Someone from the party ran at me with his phone in his hand, and he said to me, my brother is on the line, okay, and someone shoot at him on the road, on the main road. Immediately I took his phone and I ran into the police room, and I tell the police officer that was there, take the phone, speak with him.
Sagi, together with 2 other policemen, drove to the location of the shooting. One of them was Eliona Ostafenko. On the main road, only 220 yards from the party area, they encountered first signs of the tragedy that would unfold that day.
We get here, and over there near the sign, we saw a man just do like this with his hand, and we drove to him, and he says someone shoot at him, and we look at his car and we see in the back door a bullet, just a hole of a bullet. He wasn't injured.
The civilian told Sagi he saw trucks with people holding weapons.
In this moment I pulled my gun and I take him and went like off the back of the road over there, and we lay on the ground.
Meanwhile, Eliona and another policeman went back to the party area to report and call for reinforcements.
We start to understood what's happening, but we thought it's only a few ones that came here and they are still here around somewhere.
The 3 were now driving again, trying to catch up with the terrorists. Finally, they saw a car on the side of the road.
In this place we saw a white van, and we saw a man lying on the floor near the van, and he just put his hand on his belly and he screamed. So me and Ilona get off the police car and went to him and started to talk to him. And when I pulled up his shirt, I saw a big hole in his belly because of a bullet. And I said to Ilona, start make a pressure. And I get into the van from the other side. I open the door and I see a guy laying on his back with his eyes open. And I check if he had the pulse or something like this, and he didn't have anything. He was murdered.
While Sagi and Ilona tended to the wounded, the 3rd policeman drove back to fetch the medical teams.
So we are here, only me and Ilona, with no communication, no car, no anything. We stay with the injured people. And then we saw 2 jeeps that come at us, and they park like 100, 150 meters from us. And from each jeep, get off something like 6 or 7 terrorists each. So it's like 12 or 14 terrorists. And they're just starting to shoot at us.
The 2 were standing in an open field. While outnumbered, the terrorists were also better armed with rifles and RPGs. Eliona and Sagi had their personal weapons and 2 magazines with 15 bullets each. Sagi dragged the wounded civilian to the other side of the van. An exchange of fire began as they tried to shoot back, but they realized they didn't stand a chance.
I tell Ilona we have to run back, but there is nowhere to run back here. And then I see this water pipe.
Under fire, they both ran as fast as they could.
They shoot at us. The bullets are like everywhere.
And then, the second before they reached the water pipe, Eliona was hit.
Exactly in this point, like 1 or 2 meters from the pipe, Ilona said to me, "I'm hit," and she hold her breath, and she is feeling over here. And I get here behind this pipe, and I lie right here, and my head is behind this pipe, and I'm right here, and with my pistol, I shoot at them, and they shoot at me like tons of bullets.
The terrorists went back to the van to make sure the 2 wounded civilians were dead.
You are complete yourself with the thought that you're gonna die. It's the only thing you think of. The only thing you think of. That's it.
1 against 14 terrorists. What chance did Sagi have?
One of them go to their jeep and he bring an RPG and he go over his knees and he shoot the RPG on me, and the RPG is exploding like 10, 15 meters behind me.
The 14 terrorists came into Sagi's direction. He played dead and didn't shoot back.
And then I see 2 army chopper just getting from this way to this way above this field. And the terrorists see the chopper. And they take 3 RPG and they shoot on the chopper.
Luckily, they missed, but now the terrorists, for some inexplicable reason, go back on their jeeps and flee.
In this moment, I check Ilona that are laying here, and unfortunately, she murdered.
Eliona Ostafenko was killed at the age of 25. In total, 58 police officers died protecting the partygoers of the Nova Festival on October 7, making it the biggest tragedy in the history of Israeli police.
I see car going just to the terrorist direction, and I ran to the road and just stop.
Sagi could still spot the terrorists on the side of the road, waiting for more cars to cross. He updated the soldier inside the car. The two did a U-turn in the intersection nearby. They saw a group of 100 Nova Festival survivors. He took charge and put them all in a safe room. The soldier, a civilian with a gun, and Sagi guarded the entrance of the safe room for hours until the IDF was able to extract them to a safe location. Over 2 months have passed, and these beautiful fields that on October 7 became the landscape of an unimaginable horror movie are now again peaceful, thanks to the men and women who put their lives on the line to save others.
And we're going to go on a short break, but when we come back, we're going to immediately move to the northern border where rockets were fired at the town of Acre not just a few minutes ago. So stay with us. We're going to be right back in about 3 minutes.
Israel is in a state of war. Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front line, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Thanks for staying with us. We're going to open up immediately with our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osirand, who is standing by live in Israel's north. Ariel, rocket fire from the north only a few minutes ago. Walk us through the latest developments on that front.
Right, Ariel. So about 15 minutes ago, rocket alert sirens sounded in multiple areas in the western Galilee, also in the border community of Shlomi, but also further south in the coastal city of Acre, or Akko as it's called in Hebrew. According to Israel's emergency services, MADA, there have been no injuries as a result of this attack, but this comes at the heels just an hour and a half after another launch of a drone towards Israel. The IDF saying its aerial defense systems were activated following a suspicious aerial target that infiltrated into Israeli territory. Now, there was no specification whether this drone was, or this suspicious aerial target was indeed intercepted, but the IDF's home front command saying that the incident is now over, and on the Lebanese side claims that even images coming out of an IDF interceptor from this attack falling on a car outside a school in the southern village of Yatar, that is close to the other side of the border from Shlomi, where these sirens were heard. No reports of injuries there, but this all happening within in a span of an hour and a half, as the border here continues to heat up today following 65 days of war between Israel and Hezbollah on this Israel-Lebanon border.
Well, thank you very much, Ariel, for that update from the north. We will be back with you later in the show as we know more about the situation. That said, we are going to return to Hanan Geffen, Brigadier General Hanan Geffen, in the studio. Hanan, I want to open with you on the situation with Hezbollah. You described this escalating fire we're seeing as a form of wordless dialogue going on with Hezbollah about what their position is going to be in this final accounting in the war. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, actually, we have already experienced of 2 months and more, and the days are counting. What we have seen compared to the past, Hezbollah is very strict in the way he's reacting. And Israel, again, contrary to the past, is more active. Every day is enlarging, and the targets arsenal is growing. Israel is targeting much more targets than it used to do in the past. Now, and Hezbollah is keeping very strict to this equality equation. Nasrallah was the man who, Nasrallah, the head of Secretary of Hezbollah, was the one that. Was the one guy that created the thing that called equation, and now the equation was in the past. It's a quid pro quo. Now this has changed dramatically in the last 2 months, and it's going to more than that every day. Now I believe just. Deducting from what you have seen, this is a kind of a dialogue through artillery and exchange of fire, where there is establishing a kind of entrance to the diplomatic negotiation, which is running in the background. The French are running, and others, Saudis and probably others, are running some negotiation, trying to find a solution to what is going on. And the terms Israel presented are very strict, are very, I would say, different from what Hezbollah were used to. Israel is not asking for a peace or quiet. Israel is saying Hezbollah must withdraw back from the border, north of the Litani, which is about 20 to 40 kilometers far from the border, as a precondition to accepting a ceasefire. Now Hezbollah understands it, and he's not reacting. Hezbollah is I would describe it as like a cat caught on the lights of a car. He's just frozen there, and the same 20 targets are targeted day after day. The same 20 targets. You can run a research, and you see 20 targets. Some of the buildings which are probably deserted gloriously publicized by this Hezbollah as a military gross big achievement. And so they're strict, they are frozen, and I believe they understand that there will be a price that they will have to pay through this kind of negotiation of ongoing fire exchange, this kind of negotiation. They gradually understand that they will have to pay a price. And I believe in a few days we'll see. Yesterday there was an occasion, or the day before yesterday, I think, one of the village leaders, 80-year-old guy, was unfortunately hit there in Lebanon. I expected kind of retaliation, because in the past they would have retaliated within hours very ferociously, and this time it passed quietly. So again, it's part of this pattern we have seen for the last 2 months.
And we're going to continue this discussion in a moment, but first we are going to turn our eye back to Israel South. Our correspondent Pierre Clochon is standing by just outside the border community of Sderot. You know, not that long ago we were seeing more rocket attacks in the area. Walk us through the latest there on that front, as well as what we're seeing of IDF activity inside Gaza itself.
Well, first of all, about half an hour ago, there was some rocket fire over Sderot. One interception, no damage, no casualties. Earlier on, there was rocket fire on the southern city of Ashkelon, which is 10 kilometers away from the Gaza border and has been the hardest hit city by rocket fire. There were 4 interceptions, no casualties, no damage. And the operation is going on around the 3 focal points that have been the 3 focal points for the past 12 days. I'll start from north to south. In Beit Lahia, in the northwestern part of Gaza City, there was a siege, according to Palestinian media affiliated to Hamas, of the Kamel Adwan hospital for a few days. And it seems that the people that are inside the hospital decided to surrender themselves. And that could be also a hospital in which Hamas terrorists, in civilian clothes obviously, were hiding. And this is why the army besieged the hospital, if the Palestinian media report is true. And that would mean that the civilians are going out, and then the army is picking up the men and interrogating them on the field immediately in order to gather some immediate intelligence about the whereabouts of terror cells or weapons depots or tunnel shafts, that kind of thing. And in Bet Hanun, just behind me, the same destruction of infrastructure. The engineering corps and the Yalom unit, which is specialized in tunnels, are very busy in either cementing the tunnel shafts with concrete or simply destroying them with explosive charges, huge explosive charges, obviously. In the northern outskirts of Gaza City, in Jabalia refugee camp, still close combat, fierce fighting on a battle-hardened battalion of Hamas. But it seems, according to the Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, yesterday evening, that these battalions, the one in the Jabalia refugee camp and the other one in the southeastern outskirts of Gaza City in Shejaiya, these battalions are slowly but surely crumbling, on the verge of collapse, he said. And that's because the chain of command has been badly hammered. 50% at least of the Hamas officers from regiment level to company level have been annihilated, and this is why you see more and more Hamas terrorists surrendering, because they just don't get any orders. They feel isolated. They don't know if their commanders are alive or just hiding in bunkers. And there's a lot of frustration, and they decide to surrender themselves. In the last focal point is Khan Younis, which is encircled, with also operations by the 98th Division of Commando units in the heart of Khan Younis. But from Palestinian media, we gather that there is fierce fighting on the south eastern outskirts of Khan Younis in El Abasan, as well as on the northeastern outskirts of Khan Younis in the community of Bani Suhaila. There's also bombing in Rafah against a terror faction called the Popular Resistance Committee that made a lot of money during the smuggling through tunnels crossing from Egypt to the Gaza Strip, and the fear is that Hamas leaders and hostages could be smuggled back to Egyptian territory.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for that report from the south. We're going to be talking a little bit more about some of the intelligence coming out of the southern front in the most recent days. Intelligence reports said that at least 500 prisoners have been taken in combat operations against Hamas in Gaza in the last month, in addition to the pictures we've seen in the recent days showing scores of terrorists surrendering to Israeli forces. The defense establishment says invaluable information has been extracted from the enemy in interrogations. But what does that mean, and how does Israel actually do it to ensure that the information they get isn't just anything, but actually good information, even when doing an interrogation on battlefield conditions itself? Well, for more on this, we are joined by Michael Kuby, the former head of interrogation at the Shin Bet Internal Security Services. Michael, it's good to have you with us. How does a battlefield interrogation actually work?
Look, I think that the battle interrogation is very important for the forces because it's, you know, in a real time they can act anywhere. It works when there is a special, you know, intelligence from a 504 unit that interrogate with them inside the battle, you know, at the middle of the battle, and they must tell us, you know, all the truth about all the places they are, you know, all the tunnels, all the terrorists that they are in that place.
What do you do if you think he's lying?
What? Excuse me?
The person you're interrogating, what do you do if you think he's lying? He's trying to lead the troops into a trap.
I don't think that in that condition, you know, in those conditions, the terrorists will lie. They are very afraid. They are in shock. They know if they want to save their life, they must speak and tell us everything.
In your experience, how many of them are willing to talk versus how many of them are so ideological they're going to fight to the death?
You know, I used to be in a few battles, you know, in the past, in Lebanon and other places. All the terrorists that we interrogated with them during the battle, all of them tell us all the truth during the battle. They tell everything that we ask, you know. We ask about names of terrorists. We ask about the places that the officers are in. Everything. They are telling us about the weapon that there is. If there is, you know, if they prepare a bomb nearby the forces, everything.
So what sort of information have Israeli soldiers gotten out of these interrogations on the battlefield?
Look, they need, you know, information of terrorists that are hidden, you know, in nearby, and about bombs that they prepare to the forces, and of course, everything about the area, about the battle.
Now, I understand that you yourself interrogated several of the highest profile names on the list when it comes down to Hamas and other terrorist leadership. Who were some of them, and how are they so relevant in the current conflict still?
Look, I generally interrogated, you know, inside a room, you know, terrorists that they were arrested, and they bring them to, you know, to my office. For example, at 1989, I interrogated with 500 people belong to the Hamas, members of the Hamas. At 89, it's all started at 1983 when Ahmad Yassin decided to build, you know, the Mujama. It used to call Mujama Islami before the Hamas name. and he started to build a new organization, very radical, to to go with the jihad.
Now, we're also hearing reports now that Marwan Barghouti may be released as part of a future deal. Were you involved with the interrogation of Barghouti, and what do we know about him?
No, I wasn't involved in the Barghouti interrogation, but I'm sure he wouldn't release. I'm sure he wouldn't never release. He is taking care for a few, suicide bombing in Jerusalem. He himself, he wasn't inside, but he sent those people to do that suicide bombing.
Okay, and
he would never be released.
You mentioned, because we had been talking so much about these battlefield interrogations a moment ago, and you mentioned that you were doing more controlled situation interrogations. What sort of difference do we see in what's done in those interrogations and what sort of information we get out of them?
Look, generally, all the terrorists are talking. It depends if it after a few minutes or 1 hour. During the battle, we need the intelligence, very immediately. We have to know immediately if there are terrorists nearby, if they prepare any kind of bomb against the soldiers, and etc. But during the interrogation in a room, it's other things. I never saw one of the detainees that didn't talk at the end. They are talking. If it's a ticking bomb, of course we have to use a physical power against them.
Thank you very much, Michael, for helping us understand how the information is gotten and how you make sure it's true. Now, we still have Hanan Geffen in studio with us to discuss this more from one intelligence side to the other. He gets the information. You guys use the information. Walk us through the sort of pipeline we see from interrogation to battlefield targets.
Well, there are many kinds here. One of them mentioned here is, and he mentioned Unit 504. If you listen carefully, he mentioned that there are people interrogating both Shabak, the internal security guys, and 504 military guys. They are trained people, trained directly to the information to the local commander. This information will be sent later back for further discussion, but immediately this kind of information is used, especially in this populated warfare. You have to use this information immediately because you are not moving. You have to be very careful for booby traps and all what they try to prepare. So this information is very useful. But in the background, there's a lot of intelligence work being done. Gaza is constantly monitored from the air. We know exactly everywhere everything is done. And it's not a coincidence that during the ceasefire, the Hamas insisted that this kind of reconnaissance, constant air surveillance will be stopped because they know the movement from each place. There are soldiers and girl soldiers, many of them they are girl soldiers, that they know the vicinity so well that this kind of moving from one place to another is strange, is something that we have to watch. So the intelligence guy in the back room getting used to know the terrain, the kilometer on kilometer or this kind of dimension, and they can warn the commander in that place directly. And so this is another kind of information. Now they combine other kind of information from several sources and sending it directly together with the information the commander gets in field. So he's working according to very carefully, slowly. We know that we are working slowly, a populated, dangerous area. So this is the intelligence contribution. And this war from the beginning, a totally different warfare. And this is combined with another thing, and this warfare is very visible. The blackout the IDF is using to make sure that the information is not going out. I don't think no one saw lines of advance of the military Israeli, and it's on purpose.
Absolutely. We're seeing that pay dividends in the speed of the advance. Hanan, thank you so much for explaining everything that we've been seeing. We are, though, going to turn our attention now to Kibbutz Be'eri. That's a name that's become synonymous with sadism, murder, and the worst horrors a human being can witness, but also a place where life still has to go on despite a gaping wound left in the community. More in this report.
Yigal Shitrit has lived and worked in Be'eri for several decades, but on October 7th, everything changed.
Those are the members of the kibbutz that used to work in the print and were murdered, part of the more than 90 people that were murdered on the 7th of October, Saturday. We have here people that I know for more than 40 years. Part of them are from my class in the kibbutz. Part of them I worked with for over 25 years. At the bottom, we have the picture of Yossi Sharabi, which is, he is abducted with his brother Eli Sharabi. And the last person to be added to this wall is Sar Baruch, may he rest in peace. We heard about it on Saturday.
Yigal Shitrit's former classmates include Gil Buyum, who was murdered with his son, and Oron Bira, who was killed with his wife and 2 children, including his daughter Tair, also an employee of the company. In all, almost 90 people from Kibbutz Be'eri were killed, including children. But barely a week after the October 7th massacres, the printing works resumed its activities.
Here, I want to tell you something about Yitzhak Bachar. He's 80 years old. He comes to work every day from Yam HaMelach to Be'eri. The last person that was added to the wall is Sar Baruch, is his grandson. His wife was murdered on the Saturday the 7th. His other grandson was murdered on the Saturday of the 7th of October. And Yitzhak comes every day to work. This is a story of strength, of belief, of everything that means Kibbutz Be'eri or Tfus Be'eri. Look at this person, it's amazing.
Natasha Cohen also works at the printing works. She and her family have lived on Kibbutz Be'eri for 32 years. On October 7th, when the numerous rocket alerts began to sound around 6:30 a.m., her husband was out walking the dog.
Within minutes, we heard a motorcycle. And I looked at my husband and I said to him, oh dear, it must be from the party. They're probably running away to, look for shelter. Tell them to come in. So he went right up to the fence and had a look. And as it came by, so I was busy trying to calm my dog down, so I didn't see them because the fence is, about this high. And then he said to me, it's terrorists. I saw 2 terrorists on a motorcycle with machine guns. And I looked at him and I said, it's, you couldn't fathom terrorists. It sounds crazy, who rockets we used to, but not terrorists.
Natasha and her family were very lucky because she lives only a few meters from the attacked neighborhood and the terrorists saw her husband. Natasha's family had to stay in the safe room from 7 a.m. until 11 p.m.
That horrible feeling of sitting in your safety room when friends are shouting for help and screaming to help, and you got this useless feeling, you can't do anything about it. Just reading the messages and trying to, call for help. And we were waiting, for the army to come in. Time goes by when you realize the army's not coming in and your friends are shouting for help and there's nothing you can do. You realize there's a big problem because if the army's not here, something's definitely gone wrong.
Several employees of the printing works' accounting department were murdered on October 7th. Natasha, who was in charge of the kibbutz's finances, resumed her work at the printing works a few weeks ago, first remotely and then, a few days ago, on site, having decided to move back.
I didn't think I'd ever come back to Be'eri, thinking to myself, how could I ever come back to a place where I wouldn't feel safe again? But within a very short time after that, you start getting angry and you think they've taken everything, they've ripped everything under your feet, taken your security, your friends, family members, taking my home away from me as well, because we were basically fugitives in our own country. And I think it was the anger of, the humiliation of me not having my own home and them trying to take that from me as well is what it made me decide to come back.
The print house started to work on the second week after the October 7th because of two main things. One, it's vital for us, for us all. It's a show of normalcy. In a time that there's no normalcy, we don't even have the language to describe what happened to us after the 7th of October. What you see here, it's not less than amazing. Beyond the strength and resilience, as I said before, it's a beacon. Most of the employees that are working on day to day, they're not from the kibbutz now. They're from all over the area. And they come on daily basis because it's part of their lives. It's their second home.
The Be'eri Printing Works, founded in 1950, is the largest in Israel. It employs 350 people. It is here that a huge number of official documents, including credit cards, checkbooks, and driver's licenses, are printed for the whole country. Miraculously, the printing works was hardly touched by the terrorists. However, bullet holes can be seen here and there, especially on windows, but also on this TV set. A little further along the kibbutz's pathways are destroyed houses as far as the eye can see. Among them, Yigal's. On October 7th, he was not there. With emotion, he shows us what's left of what he calls his fortress.
This is our home. Most of us plan to come back when it will be available. Other people won't be able to come back. Emotionally, this home, Be'eri, suffered on the 7th of October, suffered a lot. And I believe from this suffering, we'll have growth.
A hope imprinted in every kibbutz resident.
And we're going to be right back after a short 3-minute break, so stay with us.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Hay frases que sabes desde dónde vienen.
Ven acá, ¿y el paquetico pa' cuándo?
Y recargas que ya sabes hacia dónde van. Envía recargas internacionales Altis a tu gente en RD. Accede a nuestra página web recargas.altis.com.bo. Selecciona recargas y digita el número al que deseas colocarle la recarga. Además, ellos reciben el doble de balance en recargas de $8 o más.
Altis, la red global de los dominicanos.
Israel is in a state of war. Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front line, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra, espadas de hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I24 News.
And thank you for staying with us. We're going to first take a look at Israel's northern border. Again, our Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran is standing by at that border. There's some very intense fighting on the northern front over the past 24 hours. What are we seeing today, Ariel?
Right, Ariel. We're seeing a continuation of the cross-border fire with just 20 minutes ago, rocket alert sirens sounding once again in the border community of Shlomi. There's no reports of injuries in that incident, and that comes at the heels of another another barrage of rockets, also to Shlomi, also to Akko, the northern coastal city of Acre. And according to Israel's emergency services, those incidents as well did not result in any injuries. And earlier there were drone infiltration sirens sounded in multiple border communities. The IDF saying that its aerial defense systems did identify a suspected aerial target, and they had launched some interceptors. The incident has been is over, but no confirmation as to whether this drone was intercepted. On the Lebanese side, that claims that the said interceptors, some fell on civilian cars. No injuries in that incident, and that shows that not only the weather, but the situation, the security situation along the Israel-Lebanon border can change in a moment's notice.
Absolutely, and we still have no idea where that's going to end. Ariel, thank you very much for that update from the Northern Front. Now, we are joined in studio by Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., as well as Deputy Foreign Minister. Danny, I want to jump more into the weeds here on what we're seeing with the Americans. The Americans are very concerned about the action on Israel's northern border as well. They have been very, very clear since the beginning. They want nothing less than a regional war to break out here. Now we're seeing the Americans mix messages with the South. The idea of a time frame that Israel has to wrap the war up on, but also making sure that Israel knows that the goals to finish Hamas are not to be compromised. What's going on with the American messaging here?
Well, seemingly this is quite contradictory messaging, but I would say that near as I can tell, they're really keeping an even keel with Israel, with the goal, keeping the eyes on the ball of eliminating Hamas as a viable entity that could either govern Gaza or even later on. And this is very important, Ariel, and this is why it is so important for the Americans to do away with Hamas, because when they speak about the vision, a political process with the Palestinians, they understand that with Hamas there is no chance for a viable political process. This is why they want to do away with them. Secondly, they understand also that this very nefarious consequence for the region, if we end up this war short of eliminating Hamas, if Hamas keeps standing, even very feebly, but still standing, that would be maybe a military, a tactical achievement, but a real strategic failure, because the region itself will tilt towards anarchy and towards extremism. It will be a victory for Iran and its proxies. And now we see, as everybody's acting up, Hezbollah in the north, the Houthis, this is also a direct threat to American interests. So this is why I am optimistic that they will keep with the supporting Israel. And it's not a matter of time frame. It's not time frame which is dependent on the calendar, but it is dependent upon achievements and developments on the ground.
I want to go more into some of the United States' visions for Gaza afterwards, because you mentioned that they recognize Hamas cannot be a political entity, they cannot be reasoned with, they cannot be negotiated with, but they are insistent on what they're calling a revitalized Palestinian Authority. Many in Israel see that as a non-starter given the group's terrorist past and the fact that the claims that they make are not drastically different than the claims that Hamas makes. Is the United States correct in that they may be a viable alternative, or do they have to be treated with the exact same gloves as Hamas?
Well, they're correct with the vision, but I think there is, I wouldn't want to blame them for not really, they understand the details as well, you know, and here, I would say the devil is definitely in the details. And here it will all depend on how much will they want to invest in terms of political capital, in terms of money, in terms of also bringing together a coalition of Arab countries that can really support a, you know, quote unquote, a revitalized Palestinian Authority. There's nothing new about it. I am a graduate of a new and revitalized Palestinian Authority in 2004. This was in the wake of the defensive shield. At that time, the Americans also understanding, together with Israel, that Arafat was no partner. So the idea was to remove Arafat and bring who? Abu Mazen. Abu Mazen was, you know, a sweet talker, but on the ground, nothing changed. Support of terrorism, financing of terrorism, delegitimizing Israel in the Hague Tribunal and anywhere else, not a partner. I think now, since we have experience already, Israel should demand, okay, let's say if we do that, it shouldn't be the same experience of 2004 where we just change heads. We need to change the political culture altogether. And for that, I think it would be wise for Israel not to say no, no, no to anything, but to say yes, but.
So we're going to see if there's a mechanism to do that. We're going to be back to this discussion in a brief moment. First, though, I do want to turn our attention to the south, where our correspondent, Pierre Clochindler, is standing by just outside the border town of Sderot. Pierre, more rocket attacks in the last hour or so. Walk us through the latest that we're seeing come out of the Gaza Strip, and also what we know about the latest troop movements inside.
Well, I want to talk to you about a front that is quite ignored in that war, and it's a real front. That's the humanitarian front. There are constant effort by the Israeli army urging the population to leave the battleground wherever it is. And there are three focal points right now, which is the Jabalia refugee camp, the southeast outskirts of Gaza City, Shejaiya, and Khan Younis, the major city in the central Gaza Strip. But there is every day two axes of humanitarian access which allow the population to move south and to leave the battleground. Now, the problem is that creates a humanitarian problem because 80% or over 80%, according to the UN organization, are now in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, which means instead of 2.2 million people spread out on 360 square kilometers, you have 2 million people, more or less, squeezed into 180 square kilometers, and the needs are dire for the non-involved population. So in addition to the humanitarian access, there's been always one crossing point between Egypt and Israel, which allows the passing of humanitarian aid to the Rafah crossing, which is at an hour drive from the Nitzana border crossing. Now there is a new border crossing which has been added to the humanitarian efforts, which will allow to double up the humanitarian assistance to the non-involved population. For instance, water, food, medicine, material to build shelters, even fuel, which was a big issue within the Israeli government, as well as cooking gas for the population. The problem is, now that two crossings are open, is that with the humanitarian aid, that prolonges the war, according to military experts. Why? Because some of that aid is captated, is looted by the Hamas terrorists. We've seen videos of Hamas terrorists on top of trucks, just hijaking the trucks for their own terror purposes. So that risk prolonging the war in the sense that the dismantlement of Hamas might take longer. But at the same time, Israel came to the conclusion that if it wants to have a real if it wants to fulfill its objective of dismantling Hamas, you need time and you need diplomatic support from the international community, especially the US. And thus, if at the beginning of the war, while Israel was still in state of shock because of the October 7 massacre and the government was preparing actively the ground offensive and the bombing campaign and didn't really think about fuel and cooking gas, now it's become an issue. It's become something that the Israeli government must accept in order to prolong the war and fulfill the mission that has been given by the Israeli government.
Well, thank you very much, Pierre, for that report from the South on the humanitarian situation and the position of the United States. It's worth noting the United States has vowed to support Israel until Hamas is defeated. U.S. President Joe Biden specifically saying weapons will continue to flow to arm Israel's military during the conflict. But America's Congress is still playing political games with $14 billion worth of military aid, even as the administration looks for loopholes to send ammunition to Israel and bypass Congress entirely. So just how did Israel become so dependent on U.S. arms shipments in the first place? Israel is noteworthy for being one of the biggest arms exporters on earth, coming in at 10th place this year. That's far in excess of Israel's tiny population. But if Israel is so prolific at making and selling weapons, why doesn't it make enough to supply its own military? Why must the IDF always fight on America's leash? Well, for more on this, we are joined by Brigadier General Reservist Professor Jacob Nagel, Senior Fellow for the Foundation for Defensive Democracies and former National Security Advisor. Jacob, thank you very much for being with us. And it's also worth noting that Donnie Ayalon is still in the studio with us. I believe the two of you know each other rather well, so feel free to jump in this conversation because both of you have plenty of experiences at all angles here. Jacob, we are going to open with you, though. The big question, how did Israel become so dependent on the United States for arms, given that Israel's a major producer of arms itself?
You are saying something that is partially right and partially wrong. Israel is not dependent on ammunition on the United States. It's a decision because, you know, I signed with the United States in 2016 the $38 billion 10 years MOU with the United States. So there are things that because the United States is giving us this aid, we are obliged to buy some of this ammunition in the United States. Israel by itself, and you have to differentiate between main platforms and ammunition. Israel can produce all the ammunition that it needs for itself. It's needed only one thing. It needs to be after a decision that we want to do it. So we will prepare in Israel in advance because to build a production line takes about 18 to 24 months. So if Israel decides that Israel wants this and this amount of ammunition and the amount of money in shekels is going to be put aside, we can build our production lines and we can produce as much as we can. The problem in the past, and again, someone will call it a problem, someone will call it an advantage, is that there in some areas we said that it's better and it's sometimes easier to get this ammunition from the United States if the aid is coming, and the United States, like JDAM, we have American JDAM, we have an Israeli JDAM. There are things, for example, you are showing now the pictures of Iron Dome and other things. Iron Dome, it's an Israeli program. Iron Dome, it's an Israeli missile. Now we are producing 50% of the missile in the United States because we are using American money, but we are also producing these missiles 100% in Israel. If we want to continue to produce it 100% in Israel, opening production line in Israel, we will have 100%. If we will open more production line in the United States, we will have it in the United States. So it's not a dependency, it's a decision. For now, this decision is working. I think that after the war, we will have to look in our defense budget. It's for sure going to be changed. It's going to be bigger, but it's also going to be changed. For example, Merkava tanks, Namer, some of those parts we can buy in the United States industry, some not, because they are not producing it. So at the end, it's a matter of decision. For example, main platforms, we are not producing F-16 or F-15 or F-35 in Israel. Those we are going to continue to buy from the United States with the generous aid of the FMF money. So it's all depends on what you really want to do and how you are planned in advance. I think you are right. It's not good to be in a situation that you are dependent in the United States to get ammunition in the middle of a war.
And that's actually a good point, good time to bring Danny into the conversation as well, because it seems to me maybe a cynical view that perhaps the United States benefits from, in a sense, undermining Israel's capacity to produce itself, something we see every time Israel talks about alternative suppliers or investing heavily in its own industry. The aid package seems to increase to try to put that off. Does the United States see a reason? Does it want to keep Israel on a short leash?
Well, I don't think so, but we must understand that there is a competition, some would say a healthy competitive relationship between the defense industries, both here and in the United States. This is why the FMF is so important, because we can get from the United States things that we do not need to invest in here, whether it's production lines or any kind of other economic assets, which may, at the end of the day, be more expensive. So mostly it's an economic game. You know, where can you get, if you can get the JDAMs far cheaper in the United States, the military, you know, concerning about their own budgets, what to come, you know, would like to do with that. Of course, there is some strategic ramification, because then it creates and builds some political dependence, which, you know, we do not like. But I think that in the last 10, 20 years, 2 decades for sure, there have been a degrading in terms of Israeli caches, you know, the stockpiles, because of different assessments. We saw the poor deployment of the military. Forget the intelligence colossal failure, but also it was a deployment. Also, the military was actually cutting down in terms of force formation, you know, less armored divisions, less munitions in the stockpiles, because their thinking was that maybe we're coming, or we're in the midst of a more quiet strategic time. Now there is a big wake-up call for all of us here, and that also will include the military industry, where I'm sure that more and more production will be moved from the United States over here to Israel.
That's when we're going to bring Jacob back in, because if we are talking about scaling back up production, is there a theoretical maximum on what that might be? And on top of that, we are talking about production lines that exist here, as you said, but what about the basic compounds that Israel needs and the basic components that go into that? Does Israel really make everything, or have the capacity to make everything at every step of the journey?
First of all, I have to, I think Danny said very accurate things, but I want to make something sure that everyone understands. According to the American laws and rules, FMF money cannot be, we cannot use it to do R&D. So some people sometimes say, we get money from the United States. Sometimes it was an OSP, money that we can spend in Israel, and we are enhancing our R&D, and then we are competing the United States. Our R&D is done by using our Israeli shekels. I'm not talking about what I call a cooperation, things that we are doing together. For example, Aero and Iron Dome and David's Link. For example, Iron Dome, all the R&D was Israeli, so it's a blue and white program. Now, about what you said before, and again, I don't think, and I agree with Danny, that United States don't want to put us in a short leash, because everything that we want to develop and produce by ourselves, and we have the budget to do it, we are doing it. our national security strategy for the last few years, almost 20 years, started in Ben Gurion, but was strengthened later in 2018 by Netanyahu, is that we have 4 pillars. We have deterrence, we have early warning, we have defense, and we have decisive victory. Now we found out in October 7 that deterrence and early warning are not working against terror activities. So we cut a lot the ground forces, mostly the ground forces, the armor forces, some of the ammunition and stockpiles, and we spend most of our money on intelligence and Air Force. Intelligence for early warning, and Air Force for deterrence, and to make sure that we can protect our borders until our reserve forces are being recruited. After 7th of October, we learned and we'll have to adapt our national security strategy to make sure that it will fit also against terrorists, because terrorists you cannot deter, and terrorists, we found out that early warning, you cannot count on it, because the 7th October timing of the attack was known almost to about 4 people. 4 people, no matter how good intelligence you have, if 4 people knows it, probably you are not going to know it in advance. So we can change our industry. We can build more production line here. We can build more production line in the United States. We must have, for our most sophisticated and important systems, we must build redundant production line in Israel and in the United States. And I count that the United States really wants the security for the state of Israel. So there are areas that we are not competing with the United States. There are areas that we are competing. For example, anti-tank missiles. We have the Spike. The United States have the Javelin. And we are competing in the world. None of the American money goes for example, for anti-tank missiles. And there are some other things. And there are things that we are cooperating. For example, the trophy that is now saving lives in Gaza is now going to save lives also of American forces, because the United States decided to buy the trophy for the United States Army. And we have the same for other things. I hope, for example, that the United States will buy more Iron Dome. They bought 2 batteries. Now they are now looking for it. The special forces, others are looking for it. And the same for David's Link. Those are 2 systems the United States need. For example, Arrow, the United States don't need. They have THAAD. So we have our Arrow for ourselves, and we build it together with the generous help of the United States.
I want to bring up that a theme that we've had in this conversation is that Israel and the United States interests converge when it comes down to Israel's military procurements and Israel's arms industry. Danny, I want to bring you into the conversation again here, because we are seeing some discussion in the U.S. Senate about conditioning the aid to Israel on how it interacts with the Palestinians as well. And while at the moment America has Israel's back, do we see the possibility of a future where Israel does need to be so much more self-sufficient because the conditions America might start putting on Israel are simply things that Israel can't accept?
Well, I think it's always good to strive to become as much as possible self-sufficient. Part of the self-sufficiency was also with the Americans about the prepositioning, where the United States had stockpiles right here in Israel that we could use, of course, with their permission in times of crisis and emergency. But this is not a substitute of becoming self-sufficient. And certainly we cannot be self-sufficient on everything, certainly not on big platforms like airplanes. But anything else, I think it would be very wise for us to invest more right now, especially as you see that the world at large, is moving into a more instability, which will lend itself to countries procuring much more defense elements. And in that, we saw it in the Ukraine, we see it in Southeast Asia, and of course here now in the Middle East, in the Gulf, with the Houthis, acting up. So as you mentioned, Ariel, Israel was number 10 in the world in terms of our size of our military industry and our exports. I think this is something that we will be very, very importantly investing in, and better, sooner than later.
And I'm going to pass back to Jacob. Oh, yeah, you want to respond?
I have one sentence to say, and it's very important. I remember the negotiation on the last MOU that we signed 2016, and it's effective from 2018, took 3 years. And it was, at the end, only 3 pages of an agreement. Now, you talked about very important thing, conditional aid. I belong to those say, if there is conditions on the aid, I don't want the aid. And I know that the United States, most of the people there agree with me. And when we came to the room, there was 2 things that we agreed in the beginning. No conditions. For example, if you remember, it was immediately after the JCPOA, the signing of the Iranian agreement. So we said, if you are going to condition the aid of Israel changing its attitude against the JCPOA, I am leaving the room, no agreement, we will wait for the next administration. The second thing was, if you want to condition the aid with some Israel behavior or making some concessions for the Palestinians or for other things, we are leaving the room. The same from both sides. There were things that was decided, no conditions on the aid. Now at the end, I know that it looks like maybe a joke, but it's not. The FMF and the aid from United States to Israel, it's very, very helpful and very important for Israel, but it also have a lot of importance and help for the United States, because we don't want the United States to fight for us here. We are the wall that keeping the American standard and the American interest in the Middle East. So sometimes it's much cheaper for the United States to give this aid to Israel than to fight in Afghanistan or in other place. You know, a year of aid from the United States to Israel, it's about 3 to 4 days of American war in Afghanistan. So at the end, it's much cheaper. And again, when we are producing things that we can do in Israel or in the United States, it's not always that the United States is cheaper. It's cheaper because we call it the color of the money, because we are using FMF.
The numbers are mind-boggling when you put it in that perspective. Jacob, I thank you very much. We're out of time. We have to go to a commercial break. So thank you so much for breaking that down for us. Jacob, Danny, and everyone else, we'll be right back.
Israel is in a state of war. Families completely gunned down in their beds.
We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front line, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
What I saw today was unbelievable. The devastation on the homes, the destruction, the scenes still that you could imagine of what happened. It was like something out of a movie. And still also the smell, overpowering. It was an important day for me and to show the viewers of I-24 News, but it was a difficult, challenging day. This was the home of Yaniv Ohana. To see basically a modern-day pogrom and to feel the vulnerability. You know, we live in Israel. We're so dependent on the army and the government and authorities to provide security. To see how all of that can be overturned in the course of one day. I think it really makes us understand how fragile our lives are and how much we're going to have to fight for our existence, our very existence in this corner of the world. Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben-David. This month marks the 38 years since I started as a journalist in Israel, and nothing was like the last 2 months. This has been the most challenging, most emotional, most heartbreaking, and in some ways most complex story that I've had to cover during that time. And never I felt the kind of responsibility that I had to present this story to the world in the right context, with the right facts, and to really speak truth to power in this situation.
And the head of the International Red Cross is set to arrive in Israel next week for a meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The international agency has faced some fierce criticism in Israel and abroad for perceived inaction in working to access the hostages, and even more for their perceived bias and condemnations. There have been organizations issuing 11 times as many criticisms of Israel as they have of Hamas in their international statements. Well, we are going to cover that in a brief moment with some visuals here, but we do have one other thing we wanted to address first as well, because we were discussing the hostages and there was just a bit of a mess up in our system here. That, of course, being some of the received information of the hostages, people only now getting the first bit of information on their loved ones, providing a drop of certainty in a sea of uncertainty and emphasizing how critical the situation is and how acute the struggle to bring them home is. More in this next report before we go to the ICRC.
It's been 65 days since Yoni's daughter, Naama, was kidnapped to Gaza. The chilling video of her abduction has become a symbol of cruelty and harm to young women and the danger they are in. When the children began to return from captivity, some of the girls returned with braids in their hair, braids that Naama's parents know closely.
Maybe it's stories we tell ourselves. Naama did a lot of triathlons in her youth, and this is exactly the way they used to do these braids.
Imagining her sitting and doing braids for a little girl she took care of is something that could actually sound normal.
Yes, it certainly warms the heart, but for a relatively limited time.
Since then, a real sign of life has arrived. Abductees who saw Naama and were with her before they were released called Yoni and said they had met her. She is injured, but alive.
The first feeling is there is air. You can breathe again. But it lasted a few hours until the evidence came. Naama is 19 years old. She's a girl. She has quite a few girls with her, young girls. We all understand their vulnerability, the potential harm that can be done to them, and the feeling that those who are running the war, there's no one to trust. They're the only ones we can put our trust in. But as long as they don't give the most basic sense of security, it actually causes this cry to be doubled and doubled.
I received a call from someone who was with him. He asked them to call me and gave my phone number. He literally said, "This is the number, please call her and tell her that I'm alive and that they should do everything possible to get me out."
The last time she heard from him was when he and their mother hid in the safe room in a bed under the blankets, and their father left and never returned. After a few days, she found out her parents were murdered and Itai was kidnapped. In the message he conveyed to her through the abductees, she understood for the first time what was happening that morning.
From what Itai told the hostages that were with him, On October 7th, they were in the safe room. They covered themselves with blankets, and then the terrorists started shooting at them. My mother must have shouted that she was injured and probably died. I hope at least she died quickly and didn't suffer. But Itai already knew she was dead. It seemed that he was injured by something, and he probably stood up, according to what I understood. And then they took him away. And so that's why I say he was in fear of death from the moment they actually shot him, and he didn't die. Miraculously, he didn't die. And since then, he has been in constant fear of death until this moment.
When you receive such a sign of life, does it give hope or does it do the opposite?
There's this kind of sigh of relief for a moment that he's alive. But then I also understand that he's in the worst mental and emotional state, the worst I could never actually imagine. And even more than that, because until then, I couldn't imagine it at all. I didn't allow myself to imagine he was, where he was. And now suddenly it became tangible. I was told that he was very, very fearful and that he's very scared. I heard that from the words he said to them, from the conversations that were held there, that this is not the Itai I know.
You must understand that even if the swaps return according to the list at the moment, Itai will not be the first to come back.
First of all, I'm not ready to accept it. It's very easy to make categories, but no, there are people there waiting to be taken out, and every minute that passes, they are in danger.
You think the dog feels it too?
Yes, she misses him as well.
Since that Friday when the swap stopped and the fighting resumed, the atmosphere has changed. The same breathing space that returned for a moment gave way to great concern to Naama and Itai and to other hostages, and the understanding that there is no time.
I am the father whose daughter has been in hell for 61 days. And my feeling as a father of such a girl is that I can't help her. I can't save her.
And that's the backdrop, the pain of families of Israeli hostages held by Hamas as the head of the International Red Cross is set to arrive and will meet with many of those families to address, well, what the international agency can do. Well, to help us answer that question, we are joined by Sarah Davies, the Public Relations Officer at the International Committee of the Red Cross, joining us from Jerusalem. Thank you very much, Sarah, for being with us. I want to open up with that point. The president of the ICRC, Mirjana Spolarczyk-Egger, will be meeting with the families this coming week. What will she be telling them? What sort of comfort can she offer?
Thank you so much, firstly, for having me. As the president does plan to visit Israel and meet with the families of these hostages, we do need to remember she has met with families multiple times in Geneva. Her main concern during these conversations is giving the families a space to discuss their concerns, their frustrations, their feelings, their emotions. I mean, this is not a scenario that people could have expected, and this has ripped people's lives apart. Our main concern during these conversations is to continue to reiterate that we are relentlessly working behind the scenes as well as publicly to call for the immediate release of those who are still unfortunately held hostage, as well as our immediate access so that we can check on their welfare, provide any medical treatment, and of course, really reestablish that contact between these family members who are desperately and have been desperately waiting for news for more than 2 months now.
Now, one of the things we've seen these families demand, and one of their biggest complaints, is that the ICRC has not had any access to these hostages to know if they're alive, if they're dead, what physical condition they are in. And one of the criticisms they've had is that the ICRC has not used any leverage to try to get access. We've seen them make demands such as conditioning aid to Gaza on getting that access. If that's the only lever you have, why has it not been used? And if there are other levers, what are they, and are they being used?
Thank you. I think this is, as you said, a big topic of discussion and something that is very important to clarify. So we are a neutral organization. We do not stand on any side of a conflict. We stand with the civilians who are impacted. While we have not yet been granted access or been given the correct conditions to access the hostages and check on their well-being and their medical needs, this needs to happen at a political level, this agreement. It is a very frustrating answer. We are well aware this is not always a popular, position for our organization to be in, but for us to try and force our way in, we don't have weapons. We do not have political affiliations. Our work, our organization, for 160 years now has been to work to provide support and assistance for civilians wherever they may be that have been impacted by the conflict. We will continue to do this behind closed doors, as I said, in direct discussion with, face-to-face, the leaders of Hamas, as well as any other authorities, political individuals, states, armed groups. We are really relentlessly activating every mechanism that we have to continue these discussions and make our calls, our insist to see the hostages known.
Now, one of the things you mentioned is that the ICRC claims to have zero political affiliation. I think the biggest criticism I've seen here in Israel from the leadership level all the way down to the streets is that when we look at the public statements made online by the ICRC, a mathematical breakdown of those statements shows that 77% solely condemn Israel, while only 7% solely criticize Hamas. That's an 11 times difference. How do we account for that discrepancy if there's no political bias?
I think, first of all, we need to remember that what is posted on social media, on our webpage, this is not the entire picture of what our work. I think you will find that in a lot of our posts, in many, if not all, of our public communications, we are very much focusing on the impact of civilians. Very rarely do we come out and use terms like condemnation of any specific side. Our concern about people, civilians who are not part of the being impacted. This is our, we're ever going to find a specific, apologies. Can you hear me?
I think, yes, I think we've reconnected now.
Okay. So, sorry, what I was saying was in our public communications, it's only a part of this picture. What we very rarely do is use terms like condemn and name parties. This is part of our neutral position. This is part of our impartiality, our independence. If we have concerns about any aspect of an armed conflict, we take those concerns directly to the parties who are involved and we have these direct discussions with them. This is how we retain that trust, that we will not publicly come out and use very strong language talking about things like condemnation. And I think if you do review a lot of our public positions and stances, they are very much focused on the impact of the armed hostilities on the civilians themselves, rather than judging or blaming, one side or another in any armed conflict where we work around the world.
I want to address one of the other responsibilities of the ICRC in this conflict, and this is to oversee much of the aid that is coming into Gaza right now, because, as you mentioned, the massive amount of care needed for the civilian population in an armed conflict zone. How is the ICRC ensuring that the aid is actually going to civilians? Because we've seen videos popping out of Gaza that show, and we're seeing this video on screen right now, that shows Hamas and other terror groups raiding trucks, taking that aid and making sure it goes to the war effort rather than to the civilians that so need it.
Of course, and this is a very valid concern in any armed conflict that we see, that aid will not go to the civilians but to those parties who are involved in the conflict. as an organization that does work in these volatile situations, in these very challenging contexts around the world, we have a very thorough, a very in-depth, multi-layered system and process to ensure that the aid that we distribute goes directly to the civilians who need it, whether that be medical supplies to our own surgical team who are working in Gaza right now, whether it be things like body bags, things like chlorine tablets, any type of assistance that we provide. We have a very thorough, in-depth system and process to ensure that the civilians who need it are the ones who receive it. We also do have, as per our mandate around the world, a relationship with the local authorities and with Hamas, as we have been working in Gaza for decades now. This would be part of our discussion, our direct conversation with Hamas, if there were any concerns about this.
I mean, we say that there are mechanisms, but we saw the video on screen. Those mechanisms don't appear to be working as well as you hoped for.
I did not see a video with the Red Cross truck, unless I am mistaken. I, of course, can't speak for any other agencies, but we do, I can very confidently say that our concern is getting this aid, these supplies to the civilians who need it, and ensuring that that is where it goes. In a multi-layered system, we do it on the ground, in regional and in global levels, to ensure that the civilians, the ones who are not part of this fight, are the ones who receive this very, very critical aid.
And, you know, I still have with me in studio, because he's been with me the entire show, Danny Alon, a former ambassador, who has had his own thoughts and insights on this and did want to ask a question as well, because there is still a lot of fear, of bias, a lot of the thoughts that there has not been enough done. And we do want to address those claims, Danny, so I want to give you a chance to jump in.
Yes. Well, first of all, I certainly agree with Ms. Davis about not the ICRC not in possession of, let's say, hard power. They don't have armored divisions that they can help them pursue their mission. But they do possess enormous amount of soft power in terms of their prestige, credibility, in terms of their moral authority. And I'm afraid all these are going to be lost if they do not bring back the hostages, or at least do not get a list or supply them with much needed medical medicine that they need. And here, where do I see the ICRC can work, maybe, if I humbly suggest, in a more effective, it is, yes, behind the scenes, it is with the political power, but I think here there should be a consistent pressure on Hamas and all those who master Hamas, whether it's Qatar. And if the ICRC will bring the message home that what they're doing is really war crimes which could affect them politically, including not having such a prestige and having in Doha international conferences. This is something that could work. ICRC can do it, maybe not out loud in the newspaper, but certainly by applying and meeting on a daily basis with leaders around the world and pleading for the hostages. And last thing I want to say, it's not a real, it's not dissimilar. When you're talking about the plight in Gaza, there are the Hamas, there is embedded, there is, of course, the population there, which are being human shields. Here we're talking about hostages who were taken out of their bed, and children who are 9 months old. This is a total different. There's no hierarchy when you come to human lives, but there is a hierarchy when it comes to sufferings, and this is where the ICRC, I think, should have put all their prestige and political power, and I'm not seeing that happening, and this is very disappointing.
Sarah, how would you respond to that? Because he does bring up a point there that the credibility of the ICRC is on the line here in this conflict.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the chance to have a discussion about this. For us, not in just this context or this conflict, but everywhere around the world, we are very aware that this neutrality, our position, is not always what people would choose. This is very emotionally polarizing. As you've said, we're seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are suffering the consequences of this conflict and of the attacks on the 7th of October. I can very confidently and adamantly say we are pursuing all avenues available to us, whether that is on the ground level here, whether that is at regional level, whether that is our president continually in discussion with multiple world leaders, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, as well as the Hamas leadership. She has gone and spoken to them face to face. Other delegates, other people in the International Committee of the Red Cross have done this as well. We are activating every single available mechanism to us in order to put this pressure and our calls for the immediate release of these hostages and our access to them at the top of our priority list. I really cannot emphasize that while, of course, we do not understand, what these families or what these hostages are living through, we do know that the suffering that they have experienced, having the very fabric of their lives torn apart is not something that is an easy fix. It's not something that people get over. We will relentlessly continue to work to do this. I can assure every family member who has been impacted by this. We will continue working to the best of our available options. We will continue to relentlessly work to ensure that these hostages can be reunited with their families. However, I would like to add that this does rely on a political negotiation, which we do not take any part in.
Well, I want to thank you, Sarah, for helping address much of the criticism that's been leveled at the ICRC, because it's a very difficult situation for everyone involved. Danny, I'm glad that you could join us to explain why many people do have these criticisms. That said, we don't have the time to continue this discussion as much as I really would like to, because we do have to address, some of the stories that we are hearing from those that have returned from captivity under Hamas's cruel and sadistic control. This is the story of Sharon Aloni Cuneo, who survived 52 days as a hostage in Gaza with her 2 little girls. Before she was released, she still fears for her husband held enthralled by Hamas, and this is her story.
3 days before we were released, they separated David from us. They took him into a different hiding place. And since then, I don't know what is happening to him. The girls are torn. I'm torn. He's been my partner for 10 years. He's my other half and the love of my life. He's the father of my girls. We're asking every day, where's Dad? Where's Daddy? I need to explain to them that he's still out there. Every minute we're waiting is like a Russian roulette. Will they live through the day or not? The conditions are difficult. Condition no one needs to live in, especially not children or adults without medicine. We saw that many have already lost their lives in captivity, so each moment is critical, and we need to do everything to put the aim of releasing all hostages prior to anything else. We all have so many triggers. Every little noise, every door slam, every airplane flying. The girls get charged and cling on to me. Tantrums because they had to be so quiet for 52 days, closed up in a single room. This is not a normative situation for a 3-year-old. It means not to stay in a crowded, loud place because it reminds them of it. It means not knocking on doors next to me, not to sleep with the door shut. Life has changed. This is not life. We had to tell them that it's dangerous outside, and here we're safe. But with this safety comes rules. We need to be quiet. We must not be heard because the bad guys will come. You need to make up lots of stories and behave in a way that you would never behave at home to keep them quiet in the situation. Sometimes there was a power cut, and they let us open the door, and they drew the curtain, and then we had to whisper. How do you retain a little girl whispering for 12 hours? Every moment you have to be angry at her. Tell her, quiet, quiet, don't. Every day there was crying, frustration, anxiety. How long are we going to stay here for? Have they forgotten us? Have they given up on us? It's desperation that we'd never thought we'd experience. It's a scenario we'd never thought we'd go through. It's beyond imagination. They burned our house. And we had to, before we got suffocated from the smoke, to leave through the window without knowing if they would shoot at us, if we would come out of it alive. David climbed out. He got Julie. I saw the terrorist coming and I shouted to him, "Run away!" And then I closed the door. A few minutes later, we opened the window again. A terrorist was pointing a weapon at me. I screamed to my sister to close the window. 2 shots. Luckily, the shots didn't hit us. They hit the window. We were about to suffocate to death. That's the moment we decided to open the window. 4 terrorists were knocking on our window, signaling to us to come out. One took me one direction. The other 3 took Danielle, Emilia, and Emma the other direction. And from there, we'd been separated. We were taken to Gaza. We got injured on the way. And for 10 days, we didn't know where Emma, where my sister, and Emilia were. And after 10 days, miraculously, I heard my child cry outside the door after they said they wanted to film us. And I said to David, "This is Emma." And he said, "No, it's not Emma." And I said to him, "I'm losing it." And then he says, then a doctor comes in with Emma in his arms. And I thought I was fainting out right then and there.
אז הוא אומר לי, פתאום נכנס רופא עם אמא בידיים שלו. אז היינו כמעט עד הסוף ביחד.
We were together almost until the end, in unbearable conditions. You need to knock on a door to leave to the toilet, to ask for basic needs. My daughters were already potty trained, and I had to revert to using nappies because you knock on the door and you don't know when they'll open it. They had to pee in the sink and poo in a trash can. You don't know if there'll be food or not. You don't know. It was the first day of the release of the hostages that they separated him from us. And for 3 hours, I was begging him, "Don't go. I'm broken. I don't know how I will cope without you." And he said, "I'm petrified." And I said, "Let's send the girls away. We'll tell them to take the girls. We'll have our families to look after them. Let me stay here with you." It wasn't even an option because they took him away somewhere else.
תן לי להישאר איתך. זה בכלל לא הייתה אופציה. I think that everyone needs to understand that not enough is being done in order to free the hostages from the Gaza Strip. I can understand about all the other causes that everyone is trying to get, but there are 138 people who are suffering inside, and they need to be out. There's a lot of families without a father, without a daughter, without a brother, without a grandfather, grandmother, mother. Everyone it's like 138 families there.